My name is Juliet Uzor and I am here today to share with you how to create a ruffled tote bag. I'm going to be using a lot of scrap fabrics from my scrap stash. So first thing I need to show you is this here. I'm using some cotton. So this is cotton fabric and I'm going to be using denim for the main body of the bag. But you should be free to use whichever type of fabric you prefer. But just bear in mind that we're going to be doing some gathering. Okay. You will find all the measurements required for your tote bag here on the screen. This piece of fabric here seems to be a bit too long. It's long because after doing your gathering to create ruffles, it will become a bit shorter. Then the next one is going to be a 1 inch wide and 14 inches long bias tape. You can use a strip of fabric from your stash or you could use any bias tape you already own. You also need to use a loop turner or whatever method you like to use to turn around loops. So the first thing that I am doing here is I'm folding in my fabric, the fabric for making ruffles. I'm going to fold it in 1/4 inch and then another 1/4 inch, give it a press and then take it to the sewing machine to create the hem of our ruffles. The next thing to do now is to change the setting on our sewing machine. We really want to have the longest stitch on our machine, and we also want to adjust the tension of our sewing machine to the highest tension. That would enable us to create easy gathers. But feel free to use your preferred method of gathering fabric. You can see that I left a long tail of thread to enable me to gather my fabric a bit further. So now that I have my fabric gathered, all I need to do is pull the threads just to tighten up the gathers just a little bit and adjust them, make them look nice and neat, and attach them to the fabric. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to attach my gathered fabric to one end of the shorter fabric for the tote bag. But you can see that I flattened the very end of the gathered fabric so that I will not have too much bulk at the seam. So you need to pin the gathered fabric along the width of one of the shorter pieces of your tote bag. So the next thing to do now is to sandwich the gathers or the ruffles using the other short piece of fabric. So you can see that we have the gathers all neatly tucked away, and then we're going to pin the shorter piece of fabric for the tote bag on top of the gathers. When you take it to the sewing machine, you need to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance to make sure that both tote bag pieces, the front and the back pieces, you want them to measure up to be even. So it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So after all that handling, we can see that there's just a lot of frayed edges showing, and we do not want that. So we're going to use our preferred method of finishing raw edges. In this instance, I am going to use a strip of fabric. You can use bias tape, you can overlock your raw edges, whatever preferred method you like. But I'm going to pin on the strip of fabric, sew along 1/4 of an inch. Then when I sew it, I'll turn it over and hide the raw edges using my strip of fabric. So you can see that I am folding over my fabric first. I'm folding over the strip of fabric. When I fold it over 1/4 of an inch, and I further on fold it again to completely hide the raw edges, because I do not want them to show. After pinning it down, I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and do a neat stitch along the strip of fabric. At this point, I have my ruffles nicely stitched onto the front of the bag. I need to just do a top stitch just to keep it nice and secure and flat, because just ironing it won't really do the job for me. So I just like to do a top stitch along the top piece of fabric so it's nice and flat. So later on, we're still going to go ahead and give it a press just to keep the ruffles nice and flat. Okay, so you can see that I have the wrong sides of my tote bags facing each other, and I've got them pinned together. I'm doing that because I'm going to show you a technique called French seams to make sure that our raw edges are completely hidden. So you're going to pin the fabrics, the front and the back pieces of your tote bag together. When you pin them together, you take them to sewing machine, give them a stitch, a 1/2 inch seam allowance stitch, then you turn them inside out, and at this point we have the right sides facing each other, which is normally what people would do, but we just did the opposite. So now we have the right sides facing each other. We just need to make sure that the edges are absolutely flat, and then we'll pin all the way from one end to the other and round and the other way around, making sure that the top is open. So now that it's completely pinned, we can then sew all around our tote bag. And you can see that I've sewed it, and the inside is neat, there's no raw edges, and the outside is neat as well. Next step is to complete the top edge of the bag, the opening of the bag. So I'm going to fold it over 1/2 inch first, and then fold it over 1 inch the second time, to make sure we do not have any raw edges showing, because we want a clean finish inside and outside our tote bags. So press, 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 and then do the same thing, but the second time it's going to be at 1 inch seam allowance.
To explode.
So the next step now is to edge stitch along the folded opening of your bag. So now it's time to grab the long straps, and we're going to sew all the way down each strap, 1/2 inch seam allowance again. And after that, we're just going to use our preferred method. I prefer to use a loop turner, and we're just going to turn our fabric inside out. Now that we have our straps turned around, we need to neatly fold in both open ends of the straps at 1/2 inch. Fold them in and give them a very good press to make sure they're nice and flat before taking them over to the tote bag. Pin them in place and stitch around them. Again, I'm doing some edge stitching around the straps as close as possible to the edge. This part you need to go as slow as possible, just to make sure the straps of the bag is nice and secure. Thanks very much for your time, and I hope you have a go at making as many bags as possible. Do not forget to share your makes with me on Facebook or on Instagram, and I would really love to see your examples of your tote bags. Have fun, all the best, bye.